Many of you are likely well aware of Epic Games' attempt to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by hosting essentially a Martin Luther King Jr. event within Fortnite itself. Now, on one hand, you've got intent, and on the other hand, you've got execution. The celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. is obviously a worthy one, given the contributions this man has made to society, given the key role he played in the civil rights movement, but given the touchy nature of the subject matter and the history, you want to be able to execute a celebration of a man like this properly. And when I first heard about a Martin Luther King Jr. celebration event being hosted in Fortnite, my mind just questioned this idea, given that Fortnite is inherently all about goofiness and cartoonish violence and people essentially shooting and killing each other, all about the last man standing, just about as far away as you can get from Martin Luther King Jr.'s stance of peaceful protest. And a lot of that is sort of what came at the forefront when the event finally went live, with people essentially dancing and doing goofy stuff through his speeches, or performing emotes that have more reprehensible ramifications, which I'll get to in a bit. But here's the trailer for those who haven't seen it. This is an event organized by Time in partnership with Epic and the Martin Luther King Jr. Estate, which is different from the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, and I'll talk about that later. But here's a trailer for those who have not seen it. I mean, I think the idea was, given how many people play Fortnite, especially kids, I guess they figured this would be a good venue to engage with this educational initiative. But choosing Fortnite as a venue is what's being questioned, whether that is a correct choice, whether that's a good idea at all. But yeah, so this is the trailer itself. What this involves is essentially a map that acts as a museum for Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and history, but people were still able to essentially dress up however they wanted or perform emotes and the like, and that's led to a lot of very silly imagery that goes counter to the seriousness that the celebration of someone like Martin Luther King Jr. entails. So Chris Franklin here actually has a set of tweets that kind of really frames things perfectly, in my opinion. So he begins by noting how you've got people dressed as Alien, as a xenomorph from Alien, or as Rick Sanchez, just kind of doing silly things in this serious setting. I think Rick Sanchez and the xenomorph from Alien learned something today and have been given a lot to reflect on. And then he continues, "It's frustrating because I don't want to be snarky and dismissive. The intent here is good, and the little ludic metaphors about collaboration and teamwork and togetherness are perhaps corny and condescending and shallow, but they managed to make it more than a digital museum. But this is one of the many, many problems with the platform as a metaverse idea. You can't sell license skins for your social battle royale party 1 minute, then expect to be a serious place to learn about history the next." And that's one of the things that tarnishes all of this, is that this is very much a for-profit endeavor. Epic is benefiting from this because it is trying to draw positive attention to their game that generates revenue by encouraging people to buy skins and the like. Fortnite, by its nature, can't be everything, and I 100% agree with this. Fortnite is trying to become this metaverse, but there's a very specific tone to it. There's a very specific association with it, and you can't just host everything in this universe, in this metaverse, especially when we're dealing with something as serious as the celebration of a historical figure who played a key role in the civil rights movement. Someone who advocated peaceful protests, which Fortnite is not representative of at all by nature. Chris continues here, "I mean, this is the loading screen I got when I quit out of the March Through Time instance. Aim for the head is a hell of a thing to tag on the loading screen for a tribute to Martin Luther King. And granted, it's random and it's unrelated to the event, but that's my whole point. Clicking on this image, you can see for yourself. As this individual's loading in, headshots do significant damage. Aim for the head." Look at the imagery here amidst a Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. There's a disconnect between that and how the game is celebrating how headshots do significantly more damage. And this next tweet kind of hits the nail on the head. You can't just place a somber reflection on race and history in America in the middle of your party time battle royale any more than you can comfortably hold a wake in a Chuck E. Cheese. This is an apt comparison. This is what it feels like. It feels like the wrong venue was chosen for this kind of celebration, for this kind of reflection. Just as one would question whether any kind of serious event should be hosted at a Chuck E. Cheese, one has to question whether an event like a Martin Luther King Jr. museum, digital museum, reflection celebration should be hosted in something as silly and bombastic and cartoonishly violent as Fortnite. I mean, you can attempt to, but the execution of that becomes much more difficult when you have people who can dress up as silly things or perform silly emotes, do very video game things that wouldn't be appropriate during a Martin Luther King Jr. celebration event. Now, Chris also does try to be devil's advocate by saying, I guess part of the problem is that I'm viewing this from the lens of a critic, and as a critic of both Fortnite and the Metaverse idea more broadly, I find it hard to ignore both the tonal dissonance and the way it serves the platform itself. However, I also grant that meeting kids where they are is a strong argument, as is the idea that maybe I'm just an old man yelling at the clouds, asking for media to not be this giant gloomed together tonal mess. But gloomed together messes may well just be what things are going toward. Now, Epic Games try to mitigate some of the goofiness by disabling emotes after the event went live, when they realized that these emotes were disruptive to this experience or this educational initiative. And so here's a headline: Epic disables disrespectful Fortnite emotes. They did leave up a couple that were specifically made for the event. So Fortnite status tweeted, all emotes have been disabled in the March Through Time experience, except the 8 that are part of the experience. And if you look at some of the footage that's out there, why these emotes were disabled makes sense. So here's a clip linked by Dexerto on their Twitter page, and you can see how silly this looks. Martin Luther King giving a speech and people literally dancing all over it, being goofy all over it, and it just diminishes the impact of what this in-game event is meant to be. What didn't help matters is that people found a workaround for Epic disabling most emotes. Here's a Twitter user who said, so turns out you can bypass the locked emote wheels by using the locker emote 1 through 6 button. Here I'm demonstrating using dance off and dynamic shuffle when they're not in the event wheel. This can be used for any emote that is not built in. And here's the clip just showing that off. This guy using any emote willy-nilly, and it's a workaround that's not particularly difficult to discover or execute. Now, the big yikes moment came when people discovered that there is a specific DC package emote that Fortnite didn't disable because it was part of their business partnership. It was part of the deal that they signed together, that these emotes must remain active throughout all Fortnite events. And it unfortunately happened to be that one of these emotes involves seeing the character crack a whip, which obviously has very negative connotations when you're dealing with a setting that is reflecting on the history of Martin Luther King Jr. and African American people. Here's what this Twitter user posted. So the Fortnite Whipcrack emote cannot be disabled in the Martin Luther King Jr. event because it's part of a DC package with Catwoman, so just fucking bang up job, everyone involved. Of all emotes to disable, this is the one that you really want to disable during such an event. Here's another player who tweeted, so I just learned that Fortnite has disabled a lot of its emotes because of their Martin Luther King thing they're doing in the game, but because they had a Wonder Woman crossover, they have an obligation with DC to keep an emote in the game. Still, that emote is cracking a whip. So guess what? People are spamming. Now, this user, I believe, is mistaken when they say that the whip cracking emote is part of the Wonder Woman crossover. I believe it's more related to Catwoman, but either way, the sentiment is the same. This feels woefully misplaced, and this one should have been disabled. When you consider just the monetary aspect of things and how this is essentially beneficial for Epic Games and Fortnite as a money-generating product, and you've got this DC deal that they couldn't make an exception for this event and kept the whip cracking emote anyway, even though it is wildly inappropriate, it all makes this event seem a lot less genuine. Other Twitter users have been sharing clips of what this looks like, and scrolling down here, you can see for yourself. Here's somebody who's just taking the whip cracking emote and just spamming that all around this museum. It just really feels like Epic Games didn't really think this through, that they were too focused on the potential positive PR this could generate, rather than on whether such an event is appropriate for the venue and whether they did enough, disabled enough things for the instances of this museum where this event can be taken with some modicum of respect and seriousness. The optics surrounding all of this got bad enough that the Martin Luther King Jr. Center and Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, Bernice King, both distance themselves from this event. The Martin Luther King Jr. Center tweeted, "The King Center does not license Dr. King's intellectual property, and therefore was not involved in any decisions concerning the endeavor with Time Inc. and PlayStation Fortnite. These licensing decisions are made by Intellectual Properties Management." And Martin's daughter Bernice retweeted that along with her own statement, which reads, "Decisions around licensing my father's intellectual property are made outside of my personal purview." So they're both coming out and saying this is not something that has our approval and it's not within our purview because legally Martin Luther King Jr. intellectual property is managed by the MLK Jr. Estate, not the center, which are two separate entities. The estate of Martin Luther King Jr. is controlled by Bernice King and her two brothers, Dexter King and Martin Luther King III, but the one who's really running things, the chief executive, is Dexter King. And the difference between the estate and the center is that the estate is for profit, whereas the center isn't. Bernice runs the non-profit MLK Center. Dexter is the chief executive for the for-profit estate. And as spotlighted by Kotaku's article here, the center remains separate from the estate, and they have butted heads before. And the estate is the one who happens to directly own King's works and most recently cut a deal to turn publishing rights for its literary archive over to HarperCollins, and they were the ones to sign whatever deal they signed with Epic Games in time to host this event. And no doubt there was money that was thrown around and exchanged, and that just tarnishes stuff like this when there is corporate agendas at play as well. So what you're left with is a Fortnite event that Epic Games try to make something that should be taken seriously, but it's being seen more as satire because of the venue itself, Fortnite, which is goofy and violent, on top of a lack of foresight on the part of Epic Games when it comes to emotes and cosmetics that has led to this event being laughed at more than being seen as something really dignified. I don't know if Epic Games intends to try something like this again, but I'll once again bring up the analogy about how just like not all events can be hosted at Chuck E. Cheese, I don't believe all kinds of events can be hosted on Fortnite because of that tonal dissonance. So maybe it's best to leave celebrations like this to venues where something like this can come across more seriously and more gracefully. But that's just one man's take on everything. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Epic Games Martin Luther King Jr. event for Fortnite, whether you were there, what you experienced, or what your general take is based on what you've heard from folks. Share your thoughts below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.